It started with a rash. Red. Raw. Angry. Jessica Alba was just a new mom trying to do everything right. She read the blogs. She followed the rules. She bought the organic shampoo, the hypoallergenic lotion, the diaper cream with the pastel branding and the words, gentle, printed on the front in lowercase letters. Everything the experts said she should trust, she trusted. But then, one night, her newborn daughter broke out in hives. Screaming, itching. Bright red welts bloomed across her tiny arms and cheeks like a warning flare Jessica couldn't ignore. She panicked, called the pediatrician, frantically scoured the product label. There was nothing obvious, nothing dangerous, nothing that said this could hurt your baby. And that's what made it worse. Jessica sat on the floor of her nursery, holding her crying child in one arm and a bottle of natural baby wash in the other. Her hands were shaking, her mind spinning. The brand had promised safety, purity, trust, but it had delivered pain. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just scared. She was angry. This wasn't just a bad reaction. It was a betrayal. A betrayal by a billion-dollar industry that wrapped itself in soft colors and soft words, while hiding behind loopholes and legal fine print. So she started digging. At first, it was just one ingredient. Then another. Then another. Fragrances. Preservatives. Chemical compounds she couldn't pronounce. She found out that many baby products, the ones marketed as gentle, natural, even organic, weren't regulated the way she assumed. In fact, the industry was built on self-regulation. Companies could choose what to disclose, how much to test, and where to cut corners. What looked like safety was often just marketing. Jessica was horrified. She thought back to her own childhood, growing up in Southern California, often sick, dealing with asthma, allergies, chronic illnesses. No one could explain why. Now, as a mother, she saw the full circle. The invisible forces she once suffered from might be hurting her daughter, too. But here's the twist most people miss. At this point, Jessica had every reason to walk away. She was already a millionaire, a globally recognized actress, star of Fantastic Four, Sin City, Into the Blue. She had success, fame, comfort. She didn't need to fight this battle. But something inside her said, you're not here just to act in someone else's story. It wasn't just about baby lotion. It was about care. Her whole life, Jessica had been told who to be by directors, producers, fashion designers, publicists. She was the face, the figure, the image, but never the owner. She'd spent years being the product. Now, she wanted to create one. On her terms. She started talking to chemists, dermatologists, sustainability experts. She cold-called manufacturers, sat through hours of pitch meetings, read every book on clean product formulation she could get her hands on. She wasn't just looking for alternatives. She was trying to build something that didn't exist. A brand that stood for transparency, clean ingredients, real accountability. She called it the Honest Company, not because it sounded trendy, but because it was the one thing she couldn't find in the industry, honesty. She pitched the idea to executives, and they smiled politely. Some nodded. Some even took meetings. But most dismissed her. Another celebrity trying to launch a lifestyle brand? Great. That's cute. Good luck. She was underestimated. Written off. Boxed into her Hollywood image. They didn't see the vision, the need, the fire behind it. But Jessica wasn't waiting for validation. She didn't need permission. She poured her savings into early prototypes, worked with a small team to test formulas, pushed for sustainability and safety, even when it meant delays and higher costs. She was relentless. And it wasn't just about branding. Jessica insisted on ingredient transparency, down to the last preservative. She demanded third-party testing, traceable supply chains, clean manufacturing. She was building more than a product. She was building trust. But behind the scenes, the pressure was real. Her money was on the line. Her reputation. Her time. Every dollar spent on lab tests or packaging was one less for marketing, hiring, scaling. There were moments where even she wondered, is this crazy? But every time she held her daughter, she remembered the rash, the cries, the helplessness, and she kept going. Jessica Alba was no longer the girl on every billboard, no longer the go-to for summer blockbusters. Casting agents whispered it before anyone said it out loud. She was transitioning. Code for fading. Hollywood had found new faces. But Jessica wasn't fading. She was evolving. Because while the world was waiting for her next film, She was building something much bigger, something off camera and far more personal. A company, a revolution. But there was a problem. A billion-dollar idea is worthless if you can't convince someone to believe in it. And for all her fame, Jessica Alba wasn't taken seriously in the boardroom. She walked into investor meetings and saw the looks, the polite smiles, the patronizing nods, the subtle way someone would call her sweetheart, or tell her she should be the face of the brand, not the brains behind it. It was the same story, over and over. A-list actress? Sure. CEO? Not a chance. But Jessica didn't want to license her name. She wanted ownership. She wanted equity, control, a seat at the table, and not just for show. And that's when the real war began. She pitched her idea to dozens of venture capitalists, a clean, transparent, baby-first product line that parents could actually trust. Diapers, wipes, lotions, everyday essentials made without toxins, made with truth. Some listened. Most didn't. They saw celebrity, not strategy. And when the rejections piled up, the message was clear. If she wanted to make this happen, she'd have to build it the hard way. So she found one believer, a serial entrepreneur named Brian Lee. He co-founded LegalZoom, ShoeDazzle. He understood startups. He understood scale. And most importantly, he understood what Jessica was trying to do. Together, they sketched out the foundation of what would become the Honest Company. Clean products, modern design, affordable luxury, and above all, integrity baked into the DNA. But even with Lee on board, things weren't smooth. Early product development was brutal. Clean formulas often underperformed. Sourcing was expensive. Packaging delays stacked up. Every minor win felt like a major battle. And then came the twist no one expected. Jessica Alba wasn't just showing up at board meetings, she was leading them. She obsessively reviewed product prototypes. She hounded suppliers. She personally approved scent profiles and formula textures. She insisted on consumer testing and stayed up at night reading customer feedback. This wasn't a vanity project. This was war against a billion-dollar industry built on convenience, opacity, and shortcuts. And slowly, painfully, it started to work. By 2012, the Honest Company launched with just 17 products. Within weeks, orders flooded in. Parents weren't just curious. They were desperate. For years, they had been buying what they were told was safe. Now, someone was pulling back the curtain. But growth created pressure. In just a few short years, Honest went from a scrappy startup to a juggernaut. Revenue exploded. The product line grew from diapers to cosmetics to household cleaners. But scaling a mission-driven business isn't easy. Cost ballooned. Logistics strained. Every decision came with risk. Go too fast, and you lose control. Go too slow, and the market moves without you. And in the background, something even bigger was looming. Jessica was being groomed to become one of the most unlikely moguls in consumer products. But moguls carry weight. They make enemies. And soon, the backlash would come. But through it all, she held on to one truth. She knew why she started. She knew the pain, the betrayal, the rash. That clarity, that why became her anchor. By 2015, the Honest Company was everywhere. Jessica Alba, once dismissed as just another celebrity name, had become a headline. Actress turns entrepreneur, the $1 billion baby brand, mom mogul. The company had raised over $100 million in venture capital. Its valuation soared to $1.7 billion. Retail giants were calling. The shelves of Target and Nordstrom were being stocked with Honest products. Diapers, wipes, dish soap, shampoo. Jessica wasn't just in the spotlight. She was commanding it. But here's the truth about building something that challenges an industry. You don't just disrupt. You provoke. You trigger resistance. And sometimes, retaliation. That resistance came in the most dangerous form a clean company can face. Doubt. It started with a whisper, a customer blog post, then a viral Facebook thread, then a small article. Were Honest products as clean as they claimed? A few customers reported allergic reactions. A few more claimed certain ingredients weren't listed clearly. A major news outlet ran an investigation. Suddenly, headlines changed. Is Honest really honest? For a brand built on trust, this was war. Jessica was blindsided. Everything she'd fought for, transparency, safety, accountability, was now being questioned. She responded immediately, launched internal reviews, released statements, sent her team back to the chemists, the manufacturers, the labs. And yet, the damage had begun. Then came the lawsuits. One claimed the sunscreen didn't work as advertised. Another accused the company of using an ingredient it had promised to exclude. It didn't matter that some claims were exaggerated or later dismissed. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was already forming. Jessica Alba was no longer just the actress or the founder. She was now the target. And the media? They smelled blood. She had built her brand on being the honest alternative, and now the world wanted proof. She sat through brutal meetings with her board, crisis PR teams, legal teams, supply chain audits. She cried. She raged. She asked herself, did I fail? Did I build this just to watch it fall? But failure wasn't an option, because the idea, the reason, was still real. The need for clean, transparent, trustworthy products hadn't disappeared. It was just harder now. The stakes were higher. The target on her back was larger. And yet, in the middle of all of it, she learned something every founder eventually does. No brand is bulletproof. The moment you stand for something, you open yourself up to scrutiny, criticism, misinterpretation, even betrayal. And how you respond, that's what separates a founder from a figurehead. Jessica doubled down. She revamped internal testing standards, improved transparency in labeling, strengthened third-party verifications, took the criticism and turned it into fuel. She didn't hide. She showed up, publicly, on panels, in interviews, face-to-face with customers. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't scripted, but it was real. And customers saw that. Because the truth is, people don't demand perfection. They demand honesty. And in the mess, Jessica proved the brand wasn't just a tagline. It was a mission, one she was willing to fight for. When you build something people believe in, the fall hurts more. But if you're brave enough to face the cracks, to fix them, not spin them, your brand becomes stronger than before. The lawsuits faded. The skeptics moved on. And Jessica kept building. But now, she knew something she hadn't before. Success isn't about being perfect. It's about being resilient. And the real empire? It wasn't just made of baby lotion and wipes. It was made of grit. It had been nearly a decade since the rash. Since Jessica Alba sat on the floor of her daughter's nursery, clutching a bottle of baby lotion with tears in her eyes and fury in her chest. Now she stood on the edge of a billion-dollar decision. The Honest Company was preparing to go public. Wall Street was circling. Investment banks were drafting proposals. The IPO machine was in motion, and the brand that started in a mother's desperation was now stepping into the brutal world of market capitalization, quarterly earnings, and shareholder scrutiny. This was the final transformation, from startup to stock ticker. But as the celebration buzzed in the background, the board meetings, the IPO roadshows, the headline articles, Jessica Alba was feeling something else. A quiet, persistent fear. Because going public meant letting go. And for Jessica, this wasn't just a business. It was her name, her story, her daughter's pain, her fight. If she lost control now, what would become of it? The warning signs were already there. Behind the scenes, investors were pushing for faster growth, cheaper sourcing, global expansion, more products, more categories, more shelf space. Some wanted to move into conventional retail. Others wanted to cut costs on packaging or alter formulations for scale. They said it was strategic. Jessica called it a compromise. And compromise, for her, wasn't just about margins, it was about mission. She had watched other celebrity brands sell out, dilute, fade. What started as passion ended in licensing deals and private equity takeovers. She refused to let Honest become hollow. But here's where it got complicated. As the company grew, Jessica's stake shrank. Founders rarely keep control forever. New investors come in. Boards get larger. Decisions shift from passion to spreadsheets. And by the time Honest was preparing to IPO, Jessica's ownership had fallen to just over 6%. She was the founder, the visionary, the reason it all existed. And now, she barely had a seat at the table. This is the dark side of startup success no one tells you about. The more capital you raise, the more control you give up. The more hands on the wheel, the harder it is to steer. Jessica had to make a choice. Play along, keep her title, smile for the cameras, let the machine take over. Or push back and risk everything. She chose the latter. She demanded that Honest stay true to its values, even if it meant slower growth, lower profits, or harder paths. She fought for clean ingredients, ethical supply chains, full transparency. And she made it known. If Honest was going public, it wouldn't be to cash out. It would be to scale the mission. The IPO launched in May 2021. Jessica rang the opening bell at NASDAQ. For a moment, everything looked perfect. The valuation? Over $1.4 billion. The shares? Up 40% on day one. She had done it, taken an idea born out of maternal fear and turned it into a publicly traded company. But just months later, the cracks reappeared. Supply chain chaos, rising inflation, market volatility, and worst of all, Wall Street didn't care about her mission. It wanted numbers, growth, predictability. Honest stock tumbled. The media called it a flop. Analysts whispered that maybe the company was too idealistic. Maybe Jessica had built something beautiful, but not built for the market. And again, she faced the same question. Was it worth it? Because this wasn't just a business now. It was her legacy. And the truth is, legacy costs. It costs ownership, control, and your peace. But Jessica held the line. She kept fighting for the mission, speaking on ingredient safety panels, meeting with lawmakers about consumer transparency, advocating for maternal health and sustainable practices. Even with less ownership, she was still the voice, the heart, the soul of the brand. If you want to build something that lasts, you have to decide what matters more, the payout or the purpose. And you better decide early. Because once the machine starts moving, it doesn't slow down for sentiment. Jessica didn't walk away with billions, but she walked away with something far harder to earn. A company that changed an industry. A brand born from pain, but built to protect. And the fight was far from over. They say success has a price, but no one ever tells you how high it really is until you're already paying it. By the time Jessica Alba stood on the NASDAQ floor, smiling for cameras as the Honest Company made its public debut, she wasn't just a founder. She wasn't just a mother. She was the face of something much heavier. She was a symbol of a clean beauty, safe products, the future of conscious consumerism. But beneath the polished brand deals and high-profile interviews, she was exhausted. Because building an empire doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in silence, in the dead of night, in meetings that go nowhere, in emails that never get replies, in boardrooms where you're the only woman at the table and the only one not being heard. And if you're also the brand, you don't get to walk away. Jessica had built Honest out of her own story, her own pain. Her face was the packaging. Her voice was the marketing. Her reputation was the collateral. So, when the stock dipped, when the media questioned the company's future, when investors started to circle with quiet concern, they weren't just doubting the business. They were doubting her. The burden was invisible, but constant. She was still showing up at her kids' school, still giving speeches, still reviewing product labels, and attending consumer safety roundtables. But the weight was crushing. And then came the moment no founder ever forgets. The realization that you've sacrificed something you can't get back. Time. Jessica missed birthdays, vacations. Entire weekends blurred into pitch decks and product sprints. While other moms were baking cupcakes for the school fundraiser, she was in another meeting trying to preserve the company's vision, a vision born from motherhood, but now demanding her absence from it. The irony was brutal. The thing she built to protect families was pulling her away from her own. And yet, she couldn't stop. Because Honest wasn't just a job. It was the mission. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of retreating, Jessica leaned in deeper. She began to speak, more openly than ever, about the emotional toll, about postpartum depression, about imposter syndrome, about burnout and identity, and the pressure to perform perfection for an audience that never stops watching. She didn't spin the story. She told it. Raw, honest, flawed. She said what so many founders, especially women, were too afraid to admit. That success can be lonely. That control can be suffocating. That sometimes, when you get everything you worked for, you realize it came at a cost you never fully calculated. But through that vulnerability came something powerful. Connection. Mothers saw her not as a celebrity, but as one of them. Entrepreneurs heard her not as a CEO, but as a fellow fighter. And the brand? It didn't collapse under the pressure. It grew stronger. Because when a brand is built on truth, it doesn't shatter when challenged, it adapts. Jessica began delegating more, empowering her executive team. She stepped back from daily operations, not because she didn't care, but because she finally understood the difference between leading and controlling. She wasn't quitting. She was evolving. You can grind your way to success, but you can't grind your way to peace. At some point, you have to redefine what winning means and who you're willing to become to get there. Jessica realized that an empire means nothing if you're not in it fully. As a mother, as a woman, a human being. And so she shifted. The products kept launching. The brand kept growing. The message stayed strong. But the pace became sustainable. She built the company to protect others. Now, she had to protect herself. Because in the end, the real goal wasn't just clean products. It was a clean conscience. And that's the kind of wealth money can't buy. There were no confetti. No final scene. No moment where Jessica Alba looked out over a skyline and whispered, "I made it." Because real success doesn't come with a climax. It comes quietly in steady breaths. In the way you show up, year after year, even when no one's watching. The honest company had been through the fire. Lawsuits. Market drops. Burnout. Doubt. And still, it stood. But Jessica? She wasn't done. She had spent over a decade proving she was more than a pretty face. More than a Hollywood product. More than a name stamped on a bottle. And now, with a billion-dollar brand behind her, she was turning the page from founder to force. She began investing. Quietly. Intentionally. Startups run by women. Clean wellness brands. Companies focused on sustainability, maternal health, accessible skincare. She was putting her capital where her convictions were, and her network behind the people who reminded her of who she used to be. Underestimated. Underfunded. Unheard. Jessica wasn't just backing businesses. She was building a pipeline, a new economy of founders who weren't waiting for seats at the table. They were making their own. And along the way, she became something rare. A blueprint. Not just for celebrity entrepreneurs, but for anyone who ever thought their personal pain wasn't enough to start something real. Because Jessica Alba didn't build the honest company out of business strategy. She built it from a rash. From a scream in the night. From the helplessness of holding a baby and realizing the world wasn't designed to protect her. And she did what so many people dream of. She took that pain and turned it into power. She showed that you don't need to be born into wealth to create it. That your problems aren't just obstacles, they're signals. That if you dig deep enough, there's a company buried somewhere inside your story. And she learned the hard way that money can't buy peace. But purpose? Purpose buys clarity. Focus. Impact. The wealthiest people in the world aren't just the ones who earn. They're the ones who transform what hurt them and build something that heals others. Jessica Alba didn't walk away from Hollywood. She walked towards something bigger. And in doing so, she left behind more than a brand. She left a legacy. A billion-dollar answer to a mother's question. What if I could build the world I needed when I needed it most? Now, she's still investing, still building, still showing women, and especially mothers, that they don't have to choose between heart and ambition. That you can care deeply and still win fiercely. That you can cry in the nursery and still command the boardroom. And that maybe, just maybe, the most powerful empires don't start in office towers. They start at home, in the mess, in the fear, in the love. And they're built, not to impress, but to protect. Subscribe to Money and Fame. Which celebrity's financial story should we tell next? Write it in the comments. Thank you, and see you.